I have a shameful thing to admit. I've been holding out on you guys. You see, all these years, all the videos that I've made on our little corner of YouTube here on this channel, all this time, I've had this idea for a video that I think would be really fun and really useful, and I've been putting it off. But it's not without a good excuse. It's not without an excuse, at least. You see, it's because somewhere behind me in my closet, you know that closet? I think we all have that closet, right? It's the one where we've all given up even trying to keep it organized, and we just throw in there everything that we want to keep, but nothing we want to really use on a day-to-day. It's chaos in there, right? Well, inside that closet, and honestly, I don't really know where, I have an original EMU SP-12 drum sampler. Well, today is the day that we are going to dig that out, and we are going to look into what is the hype all about for the SP-12 and the SP-1200 sampler, and how close can we get to matching its sound inside the Reason rack. But first, I gotta dig it out. So, I'm going in, and I'm taking you with me. All right, we're going in. Oh boy. Oh jeez. Okay, now I think it's back there, so we gotta first get rid of this stuff. Gotta get rid of this stuff. Let's see here. Oh, hey, look. Look at this. So, some blast from the past. Okay, I digress. Okay, we gotta get rid of this here. Okay. Ow! God damn it. Let's see here. This needs to go. Wait. Gotta get rid of this here. And this has to go. This is freakishly heavy. I think. Oh, hang on. Hang on. Da da da! Hey, look at that. There it is. SP-12 original sampling percussion hardware. All right, let's go get this back where it belongs. All right, we got it. Now, before we dive in, let's just talk real quickly for anyone that doesn't know about the SP-12 and the SP-1200 samplers. Introduced first in 1985, the SP-12 and later the SP-1200 were top-of-the-line digital samplers of their day, with a workflow geared specifically towards drum sampling. This SP-12 records audio samples at 12 bits and 27.5K, which compared to modern digital audio standards should be considered terrible, but in today's world of 32-bit floating point 192K audio, that 12-bit 27K sound, which EMU actually bragged about how good it was, is now prized for its downsampled grit and its lo-fi mojo. Okay, but so that's the first question. Does the SP-12 have a sound? And if so, what is that sound? In order to find out, I'm going to sample a drum loop into the SP-12 and then record that sample back into Reason so that we can A/B it against the original. Here's a drum loop that I got from the Reason Disco School Refill Sound Library. Okay, so we're going to plug in the output of Reason into the back of the SP-12. Then we'll set a volume threshold so it starts sampling once it starts actually getting audio coming in. We'll arm the sampler to be ready and start playback to sample. I should probably mention right now that the SP-12's total sampling time was a whopping 2.5 seconds. Okay, so we've got our sample recorded into the SP-12. Let's record it back into Reason, and then let's line it up with the original and compare them. Okay, yeah, the SP-12 definitely has a sound, but let's put some words on it. It's darker sounding, there's less top end, which you would expect given the 27K sampling rate, but even so, it's more rounded off than that. It's got more low-mid body. It feels sort of more punchy without being overly saturated or compressed. Listen again. I mean, it basically sounds like a more colored, more vibey version of our original, more clinical loop. So okay, the SP-12 is deserving of its reputation. The next question is, how close can we get to the sound using the Reason rack? Because if we could get the same color and vibe inside the Reason rack without the added hassle, the limitations, and the costs of round-tripping through an SP-12, well, I think we'd all agree that would be pretty useful. Now, there's a lot of SP-12 and 1200 plugins out there that try to emulate the sound, but to be honest, I have no idea what they think they're emulating. They sound nothing like an original SP-12. Here, without showing it on screen to name it and shame it specifically, here's one popular SP-1200 plugin being applied to our drums. Let's compare with the actual hardware and the emulation. I mean, it's doing the exact opposite of what the SP-12 is doing. It's got less low-end punch, more high-end, and like this level of saturation that just is not part of the original sound at all. So okay, I mean, we can do better than that. But when it comes to approaching an emulation task like this, what should we do? Should we just put in some effects and start winging it? For my purposes, not really. I want a more analytical way to try and match this sound. Let's just take the tonal contour coming out of the SP-12, for example. Sure, it's got less top end, more low end, but what exactly? Well, I've actually come up with an idea to match the tonal contour of the SP-12 in a rather scientific, quantitative way, and I think this might be super clever, if it works. We're going to find out together. Let's start with the stuff we know on paper. To be authentic, and I want to be as authentic as possible, the SP-12 samples are mono. So let's remove any stereo information from our sound. Thinking ahead, let's actually build this using a combinator, because if this works, you bet I'm going to be sharing the preset. I'll drag a line mixer into the combinator, holding down the shift key because I'll cable it up myself. I'll send the left side of my signal to channel 1 of the mixer, and the right side to channel 2. The master output will return to my combinator's summing mixer. And on the front side, since we're now sending everything to the center, I'll back the master output off a little bit so it's not significantly louder. Alright, let's get to the real meat and potatoes of this emulation, the frequency, tonal, curve shaping stuff. Now we know just from listening that the SP-12 is coloring the sound in a rather different way. But like, how different? No, like, exactly how different, in what exact way? And how close can we get to matching that pretty accurately? I could just go to town with a channel EQ, drag it in and start A-Bing it against the SP-12 and seeing how close I could get. But that's a pretty subjective method, which is also prone to listener bias, and frankly, it's a trial and error process I just don't think will give me a close enough result. So my plan is to solve this with white noise. No, not that white noise. This white noise. So how can this help us with our frequency shaping? Well, think about it. White noise is the result of combining every frequency in the range of human hearing. It's like 20,000 sine waves playing all at the same time. But it's also a known quantity, which means that if I take that white noise, that stable, flat, broad spectrum white noise, and sample it into the SP-12, then I can take the outputted sample from the SP-12, put it up on a spectrum analyzer, and literally see the tonal contour frequencies which have been boosted and cut by the sampling process. That's the theory, at least. Let's do it. Okay, so here's what we've got set up to do this. I've got my raw white noise here on track 1, and on track 2, I've got my sampled SP-12 white noise. When the solo is on, we're hearing the raw white noise, and we're seeing that on the spectrum analyzer. When I unsolo that, that's going to mute, and we're going to be hearing the SP-12 white noise, and we're seeing that on the spectrum analyzer, and you can see that the highs have rolled off. My goal basically is to adjust the EQ so that when I switch back and forth like this, we don't hear it as two separate statics. We just hear it as much of a sort of continuity of sound as possible. So let's work on the highs first because they are the most obvious element of this coloration. If I pull these down, you can see here it is shelving off the EQ, but it's shelving off the EQ at a rather, well, it's just a very different slope. Here, if I jump back to the SP-12, see how it's a steeper slope here. From about 6-7K onwards, it just kind of dives down in a more dramatic way. If I pull this down, I can't get the top end to dive down without really pulling the sound down. So the slope is too not aggressive enough. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to switch to the bell curve. And you see how it's more like of a notch where it pulls out. But what we're going to do is we're going to roll the EQ all the way up. And now we've got a more similar curve. In fact, yeah. Look at that. When I switch back and forth now, and we look at that spectrum analyzer, we are not seeing a big pronounced difference. It's a rather similar slope on that high-end roll-off. There's just a little more low and a little more mid to the sound. So I'm going to go ahead and bump the lows up. It's not a super sub-low. It's a... Yeah, it's that... It's verging on low mids rather than really low frequencies. Okay, yeah, I like that. I mean, already now, as I'm switching back and forth, you can hear, if we bypass this again, and we switch back and forth, that's our raw white noise. And it's really easy to tell that they are two different sounds. But when I bring my EQ back on, and I switch, it's a much more subtle change there. Let's go ahead and get some of these mids into the sound. So I'm going to boost my mids a little bit. These are going to be, like I said, these are going to be kind of subtle moves here. I'm just going to scoop a little tiny bit out of the low mids. Let's take a listen back and forth. Yeah. Okay, I think that tonal curve is the biggest part of our emulation sound. But let's address the other two elements that I heard back when we were comparing the original drums to the SP-12 sampled drums. One of those things was a fairly subtle, but definitely audible, punchiness to the sound. My favorite tool for this job is one that I covered in a recent video about Reason's hidden effects. The limiter, built into the Echo, is so simple and no-nonsense that I'll use it today. We'll drag it into the rack with the Shift key held down so that we can cable it ourselves. The audio will go into the breakout inputs to bypass the delay part of the signal chain. And then on the front side, I can just dial up the drive knob to squeeze things just a little bit. Remember, we're emulating the SP-12, and the amount of compression I heard was pretty subtle, so we're not trying to get a brick wall smack type of sound like this. It's just a little bit. Speaking of subtle, let's address the last element of the emulation, the digital downsampling vibe. I often find that this is where most hardware emulation plugins fail most often. Sure, we all think of the SP-12 as being lo-fi sounding, but they sure didn't. The owner's manual boasted of its high fidelity. The crunch of lo-fi digital distortion just isn't nearly as big a part of the emulation as people think it is. I mean, you've gotten to hear it today for yourself. Is the SP-12 overly distorting and crunching up the sound? No. So we're going to do this with a very tasteful sprinkle of downsampling with the Scream 4 distortion unit. Scream 4 has a digital algorithm where the P1 knob controls the bit depth resolution, and P2 controls the sample rate. If I turn the damage control all the way down and compensate on the master output, we can dial in a little bit of this downsampling. For the bit rate, I'm going to do a little approximation here. Assuming that the top of the knob's range is probably equivalent to 16-bit audio, and the bottom is 1-bit, I'm going to put the knob just, 75% of the way for a roughly 12-bit downsampling. For the sample rate on P2, this is where I want to be careful. It's so easy to make this a gimmicky effect. So what I'll do is start applying it ever so slowly, just until I actually hear it starting to do something. And then I'll back off one smidge back towards clean. All right, let's put it all together and cue dramatic organ swell. Test it against the real SP-12. Here's the raw original loop before it went through the SP-12. Then we sampled it, and the SP-12 colored it to sound like this. We created a mono summing mixer. We used white noise to match the tonal coloration curve. We applied very subtle amounts of dynamic compression and digital downsampling, and the result is this. Did you hear it? I didn't either. I've just switched back and forth 3 times. I can't, this is so cool. All right, let's check this out. I'll just switch back and forth here between the actual SP-12 and our emulation. That is, I gotta say, pretty close. I'm pretty psyched with how that turned out. But okay, it's one thing to make it work on one drum sample, but how does this work if we now apply it to other things? Here's what I'll do. I'm gonna go sample some other stuff with the SP-12, load it in, and then we can A/B it against our emulation and the original, and we'll see if this process works for everything. All right, I'm back. I've sampled a few sounds, and I built a custom Combinator front panel, both for ease of use and because it looks pretty badass. The Combinator, which I'll include a download link in the description, has a toggle button which turns the mono feature on and off if you're less concerned about total authenticity. And since people might have different tastes, I've given access to the limiter drive amount. And even though it's not actually authentic, if you did want more lo-fi downsampling grit, I've hooked up a control to Scream 4 to let you make the effect less subtle. I've also put controls on here for further downsampling, but you should know that all of these adjustments will move your sound further away from an authentic SP-12 emulation and just into generic lo-fi territory. In fact, I've even added a control called Bad Cable, which you can dial up if you actually want to hear some interference and static on your sound. But let's see how this Combinator emulation that we've built stacks up against the other samples that I've run through the SP-12. Here's a new drum loop from Reason's Drum Supply Loop Library. Sampled by the SP-12, you hear the same characteristics we've already identified. Rolled off top end, punchy low end, ever so slightly crunchier downsampling. So how does our Combinator do in matching this SP-12 sound? Well, that's a win in my book. Now let's check out something that's not drums. Here's a bass sample I ran through the SP-12. Does the emulation do the trick?
Yeah. Yep.
Here's a vibey little electric piano thing I got off Splice. Run through the SP-12, it sounds right at home and ready to be chopped up. So does our emulation match that same vibe? Yeah. Wow. So there you go. It was totally worth it for me to go into that closet. I think we've actually discovered a couple of key things here. One, the SP-12 and 1200 does have a vibe and it's therefore worthy of its reputation. Two, using an analytical process, we can get awfully darn close in Reason. So much so that I wouldn't know the difference if I wasn't the one switching back and forth. And three, the key to accurate emulation of the so-called lo-fi SP-12 sound is actually far more subtle than many plugins would have you believe. So download this Combinator, I'll link it in the description, and make some of your own music with it. And of course, if you do, share it with me, because I would love to hear what you do when you sprinkle a little SP-12 fairy dust on your own beats.